One of the most common disabilities that you will see in your ministries is autism. Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability characterized by social struggles, communication difficulties, and/or restrictive or repetitive patterns of behavior. Some individuals with autism may find difficulty in one of these areas, some with two, and some with all three. This is why autism is known as a spectrum disorder, and it's such a spectrum, and we'll talk about that later on. First, some individuals with autism may exhibit social struggles. Within that, some people with autism may have difficulty with social emotional reciprocity, which pertains to skills generally necessary for basic interaction with somebody else. For example, some people may have difficulty understanding that maybe I also need to talk about what the other person is interested in and not just talk about what I'm interested in. Perhaps this struggle includes difficulty in putting yourself in the other person's shoes and understanding how they may feel in certain situations. Social emotional reciprocity can also just be some simple skills necessary to engage in conversation, which is another piece of that social struggle that can occur, the difficulty in picking up on social cues and norms. This includes how close or how far away to stand next to somebody when you're having a conversation, maybe picking up on the cue that a person is ready to start a conversation, or on the flip side, a cue that somebody's ready to end the conversation. It's because of these struggles that some individuals with autism can find difficulty in making and maintaining friends. The second area that some diagnosed with autism may struggle with is communication, both verbal and nonverbal. With verbal communication, this can include difficulty relating to other people, like I mentioned, or struggles with idioms. An idiom is a type of expression, and these may be too abstract for some people with autism. Early on in my teaching career, I made the mistake of telling a student who found his missing jacket that I'd called the dogs off on the search, which is an idiom, and my next 10 minutes were spent explaining that there weren't any actual dogs roaming around the school in search of his jacket. This is why it's often important to be very literal in our communication, and we'll talk about that in our later videos. Some individuals with autism speak in a very monotone way and with a monotone delivery. Some people with autism speak using echolalia, meaning they echo back things that other people say to them. Some people script, and scripting is when you recite things overheard on TV or in movies. So maybe there's a couple lines from their favorite TV show or a movie, or my favorite as a teacher was when they would script things that their parents said at home. That's when you really got to find out what was happening inside of the household. And then some individuals with autism use alternate modes of communication, meaning they don't communicate verbally, but through other means. Communication difficulties can also include nonverbal communication. Some individuals with autism struggle with making and maintaining eye contact. Some struggle with using gestures, and sometimes with following the gestures of others. In fact, autism is largely diagnosed by the age of 3, and some of the precursors or basic indicators that they look for are eye contact and ability to use and follow gestures and pointing. Lastly, people with autism may exhibit restricted, repetitive, and/or stereotype patterns of behavior. First on the list, and oftentimes one of the most important to pay attention to, is difficulty with transitions and change. A lot of people with autism struggle with change as well with transitioning from one thing to another. While change can be hard for a lot of people, for individuals with autism, these changes or breaks from routine or transitions between activities can cause very real and very negative physiological responses in the body. These can be changes in environments, changes in relational situations, or just the change from moving from playtime to story time. We'll talk about ways to proactively support individuals with autism through transitions later on in these videos because it's so important and the need is actually often present across disabilities as well. Another big piece is sensory sensitivities. Some people with autism have sensory sensitivities to light, to sound, even if it's a low sound that you or I can't notice, sensitivities to smell, taste, touch, or affection. Some people with autism don't like to be touched, hugged, or held. Under the category of repetitive behavior falls stimming, or self-stimulatory behavior. This includes things like rocking back and forth, hand flapping, waving, humming, and these are self-soothing behaviors. Some individuals with autism may perseverate on things, may get stuck on topics. They may become hyper-focused on a certain idea or only want to talk about certain things. Sometimes an individual may get stuck on a certain sentence or question until it's addressed. And then there are struggles with the generalization of skills. This is when a person learns a certain skill in one setting, or maybe even with one particular individual, and then they can't generalize or repeat that same skill in a different setting or with a different individual. This can happen with academic skills, like being really good with money math on paper but struggling at the cash register of a real store, or with behavioral skills as well. There's so much more on autism spectrum disorder. It is very much a spectrum disorder. And this makes sense when you consider that we just talked about how people with autism can exhibit some, most, or all of these traits. As the saying goes, if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. Because autism can be so different and look so different with people, it's known as the snowflake disability, because no one person with autism is exactly the same. There is no known cause or cure of autism. At the time of this recording, 1 in 59 children are born on the autism spectrum. This prevalence rate has risen tenfold in the past 15 years, and while part of that is obviously due to the fact that we've become a lot better at identifying and diagnosing autism, there's also something else behind it that is unknown at this point. Autism is 4 to 5 times more common in boys than girls. And there are interventions available such as applied behavior analysis, which is ABA, occupational therapy, early childhood intervention, and school-based interventions. With autism, the earlier you can get in and start interventions, the better.